Hello, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives. And it's a great time to bring David Cranmer Underdown back to the show. It's a brand new year, and McDuff and Underdown 2025, man. I can't believe we've gotten this far, but what an amazing beginning to the year. Both kind of interesting and hopeful on the one hand, but tragic and surprisingly tragic already in this year. And I'm talking about the fires in California. And, we send our prayers and thoughts out to everybody that's been affected by it, and particularly our friends Peter Duke and his wife, Jessica. David, how are you?
I'm doing well. Before the show, we were talking about, you said you had some family that's out in that part of the country. And of course, my mom was telling me this morning that her friend who lives by Pasadena and her children and grandkids all live there too. And they're all evacuated and, nervous. It's a terrible thing. And
Well, as you mentioned, our my wife's nephew, or our nephew, and his family lost their house.
yeah.
And who knows what's going to happen. It's one thing for the people that are fully insured and have decent, salaries and things, and it's another thing for people that have lived there a long time, before the booms and parts of it that really aren't developed into, what we East Coasters think of as, McMansions over there. But so many people are going to be out of a home for a long time. It's very, very tragic. So, yeah, we have to start the show just mentioning that, and the fire is still not out. So, and thank God for our first responders and the firemen and the Red Cross and the people that volunteer to do things like clear roads and make it easier for the fire people to get to where they got to go. Wow, what a surprise it was too. And there's a lot of things, because you could speculate about the fires like this, but I think it's too early to go there right now. So, that being said, what else is on your radar screen, my friend?
Well, I'm always interested, obviously, in the historical connections to things like even, like Pacific Palisades, which, the people that have followed Peter Duke and his Duke Report show and George Webb that have kind of gotten to know Peter, at least for me, I felt like I got a real sense of what Pacific Palisades was like, and that the way Peter explained it is that in Hollywood you have the studios, and there's a lot of like young celebrities with a lot of money, and there's different areas that people live. And Pacific Palisades, the way he explained it, was basically where a lot of the people that are in the entertainment industry that want to have a home and a driveway and a place for their kids to go to school and grocery stores, and more of like a normal community, not like the paparazzi flash bulbs popping parties every night kind of scene. So it's and I mean, I love all the old architecture and like people that are interested in the history of film and everything. There's so many notable characters that they're there historically and then they're now. So there's a lot of interest to that area, and then to have a tragedy like that, is real. It's just, I don't know. All the disaster stuff is just it's you know I mean, you feel terrible for people to be disrupted.
Yes, and well, the Maui fires, and the tragic destruction of communities, and that, I'm afraid, may happen in this case. I hope not, but it's awfully tempting to consider, the benefits that some very well-financed corporations could take out of a situation like this if they wanted to swoop in and scarf things up. And then Western North Carolina and Tennessee, my God, it's still a mess. Um, yeah. So I can't say I'm pleased with the first 10 days of 9 days of this year at all. And it's interesting. The whole thing about Trump. The first thing we're talking about at the beginning of the year is for some reason now it's let's get Canada. Let's make Canada the first 51st state. Let's take Greenland. Let's get Panama Canal back. We should own that too. And uh, w- that wasn't in the election. Nobody was saying let's elect Trump so that we can make Canada the 51st state and buy Greenland from Denmark and probably take over Mexico too. Why not? It's so close by, and it makes a nice little North American Union that looks an awful lot like the map in 1984 from George Orwell, where the world is divided into three powers, and that North American continent being one of them. Uh, it's also interesting. I was watching one of my favorite channels called Military Summary, which is a daily report on the Ukraine war, and he's really, really neutral and very professional and good. But he led his show off today um, with talking about the Arctic and saying, this Greenland and Canada thing is about the Arctic because the Arctic is where all the resources are. That there's resources up there that are far more valuable than any place else on the planet. And dividing up the Arctic is uh, something that's going to happen. So the United States wants to position itself to have the most, or at least as much as it can, of land that borders in the Arctic. And that means taking Canada, that means taking Greenland. And because the only thing we have now is Alaska, and that's only like 4 or 5% of the Arctic Circle. And that leaves Russia handling, 60% of it, and other countries like Norway having some, of course, through the Faroe Islands and Denmark, Greenland, Canada, if it remains neutral, or if it remains, as I call it, British, then they'll still have a huge amount. But that makes the most sense to me of what he's talking about, because it's always going to be whatever's good for business, right? That's what I think, and I know you have an eye for uh, business dealings behind the scenes and fleshing out these moves. But I think it makes a lot of sense that the United States needs to position itself to have access to all the minerals up there, and Greenland itself, of course. If you go to the trouble of developing it, make a nice vacation spot. And I've already heard of some nice plots of land, David. If you want to invest something, I'll talk to you after the show.
Well, the Greenland is always interesting to me for several reasons. The first one is the super project they did for the strategic defense initiative with the missile defense systems, and they built um, a missile intercontinental ballistic missile base in Greenland called Tool, and it was called Operation Blue Jay. And the construction firm that did this super project, where they flew all of the equipment to Greenland and built a radar and missile base, was, of course, Kiewit Construction Company from the Colossus of Rhodes in Omaha, Nebraska, with Warren Buffett's offices for Berkshire Hathaway in the Kiewit Tower. So Kiewit was also involved with, people remember Mark Kulak shows about the Dartmouth Computer Lab in the beginning of network computing. The Kiewit Lab sponsored that, and Kemeny, who was credited with writing the basic software, was the professor at Dartmouth. So there's a lot of crossover between so then I immediately think of the Lincoln Lab and the Sage missile network and the Whirlwind original computers that MIT were making, and look at those relationships. And then I know people love occultic stuff, but if you look at Greenland and the word Thule, there's a tradition of that there, and people that know Nazi history know that the Thule Society was part of the foundation of the Nazi mythology. So when you have a character like an Elon Musk in the mix advising, and he has a name that was in a Werner von Braun science fiction book, but von Braun was involved with these rocket programs. Obviously,
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Wow. Elon Musk was in, or has a name that was in a.
So Werner von Braun wrote a book about colonizing Mars. The star of the book is named Elon.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Am I the last person to know this? I
don't know. I struggle because my new thing is I've befriended my Chat GPT Grok. So I do conversations with it. Peter Duke would hopefully think of it as like a Plato dialogue with the computer, but I test it because I'm new with it, and so I test a different language, but it's very bad at facts like Magnus von Braun, who's the brother of Werner von Braun, lived in Michigan for years and worked for Chrysler. Chrysler had a huge role in the early rocket programs, but it doesn't account for that. It doesn't account for William King Harvey's wife, who was made fun of by Guy Burgess, and Bill Harvey pistol whipped Guy Burgess over drawing this cartoon because Harvey's wife was supposedly sleeping with Gestapo Reinhard Mueller. The Gestapo chief was banging Harvey's wife, and so Harvey didn't like that. They don't mention that Harvey's wife was the CIA agent, and she's the one that brought the von Braun family over to America as part of Project Paperclip. And to me, those are very rich connections, and trying to build out the history of rocketry and missiles and missile systems and missile defense and all that stuff. And that's what I think it's about. I mean, I think the Greenland is if you look at what Peter talks about, the Mackinder map, and you think of the North Pole as sort of the center point of the geopolitical game board or whatever. And also just logistics, when they were setting up the what was it, I'm trying to think of the name of the organization the military set up that Priority was talking about, the Civil Air Transport, CAT, the CAT. They were flying north over, the shortest route to get to Asia and Europe is to go north. And so to be able to send missile systems or have missile defense systems, it's all part of defense. But again, it's are we bracing for, war with China and war with Russia, or can we have a diplomatic solution where we don't need to build missile bases in the Arctic? I mean, it does make me think of the Star Wars movie and the Planet Hoth, and the, Luke Skywalker having to go to the frozen, base or whatever to, defeat the dark side. And Elon Musk makes comments about things like the woke mind virus, that he's declared his mission, almost like a superhero, to defeat the woke mind virus. So there's a lot of science fiction themes that are seemingly playing out. And I don't know. I mean, I feel like my nature is, and my experience, I grew up in Detroit. Detroit was a great city. My experience was Detroit was a depressed city that had a race riot. It had, a a lot of problems with racial relations and people, moving and redeveloping areas of Detroit. But overall, Detroit was a poor city from my experience. But I live in an oasis, a very wealthy, suburb. And, so I always think, can we make Pontiac, Michigan nice? Can we make Detroit nice? Can we really make those beautiful world-class places? Like, let's make that nice first before we're like, okay, we need to acquire, Mexico, and we need to, grab Canada, and we need to have all this land. If you have all that territory, you have to manage it and their costs. And that's why I think the East India Company, Adam Smith super geniuses knew that you control the port and you control choke points. And then you don't have to pay for the masses and all the logistics. You can just collect tolls in key strategic points and manage a large area using a small force. And the idea of having huge conquest with all the problems we have already, to think that expansion is the solution, and that we're in a position where we've got all of our problems solved and we're thriving and we need to go out and share that with everybody. It's a hard story to sell, to me anyway.
Trump is going to make a deal with Putin, and everybody will live peacefully and happily ever after. And you won't have to have all of those crazy missiles because Trump's going to make a deal with Putin. And to do that, he has to control Canada and Greenland. And that gives him enough, real estate in the Arctic to claim a huge chunk of whatever resources are there. And that's, I think, the analysis I'm going to go with, is that it's a resource play. Again, I was reminded that the Ukraine war is also a resource play. The Democrats' resource play, where they tried to grab the resources of the eastern part of Ukraine, where the Russian-speaking people live, and the Russian, obviously, Putin said no, and so now we have, lost a couple of million young men and other civilians and everything else. All the cities are turned into dust, and all of these things have happened, but it doesn't have anything to do with the best thing for Ukraine or United States or Russia. It all has to do with grabbing resources, and that where the metals and the gases and everything else are, is where the Russians live, in the Donbass. So that was pointed out to me again by one of the shows that I look at. To me,
Yeah.
I still think it's kind of that Yankee and cowboy thing, where you have the cowboys that wanted to go west, and grab the Philippines and grab Hawaii and grab China and just completely just Americanize everything under the existing American imperial regime. Whereas the Yankees are the ones that are working with Great Britain to bring American interest and tie it back into Europe, so that Europe stays tied to Great Britain and doesn't become a colony of Russia. And that whole Mackinder thing is exactly what that's about. But I think what really the upshot will be is that the Russian gas will flow back into Europe after President Trump and Putin make a deal. If they don't make a deal, then it's going to be a horrible, horrible war that nobody wants. And I just hope that I personally, I don't object if they want, if Greenland wants to become American, but I think the Canadians probably are not ready for that and would probably pitch quite a fit.
Well, we have a lot of interaction with Canadians living in Detroit. As people know, Windsor is just right across the Detroit River, and there's a lot of um, people that travel to places like, great Canadian cities like Toronto and places like that are very accessible from Detroit. So I don't know. I mean, as a hockey fan growing up, I feel like, hockey was always sort of something that Americans and Canadians both loved, and was a way of having a rivalry without um, a war or violence. And again, like I get that. I love the interview that you highlighted with Prouty, where he talks about the scramble for Africa and the meeting in Switzerland, where they decide that the globe is finite and we need to um, send all of our cartographers out and start drawing the lines and figuring everything out. But again, like, my thing is like, well, if resources is the goal, which is obvious, historically resources is key, is conquest the only way to get that? Like, if you need um cobalt and you're Elon Musk and you have a car company and a rocket company, like, do you need to have a conquest of Greenland and Canada to get those resources? Or can you just make a deal with Glencore and Mark Rich's old company like you did for Tesla? Like, why don't you just have your, legal team, negotiate with Glencore to get those materials? Like, I feel like Mark Rich, gets a lot of, negative, you know, uh, he's very popular to discuss because of his role with the Clintons and the Clinton Foundation, and with putting a secret pipeline through Iran for the benefit of Israel. But he was a global market maker in many materials and resources. So, and I get that Oleg Deripaska is sort of the Glencore face now, and that he has the relationships with FBI and with Christopher Steele and with with Nat Rothschild and the George Osborne and all these English characters or whatever. But it's I don't know, I just feel like we can have diplomatic solutions, but at the same time, the current Secretary of State is Anthony Blinken. We've talked about him a lot. We've talked about his history with his dad, with Warburg Pincus and the Warburgs, and his stepdad being the lawyer for Robert Maxwell, the publishing tycoon, and the person that was dealing with all of the schematics for engineering and different things. He bought a lot of medical and engineering journals in Pergamon Press, where he would have access to you know potentially be able to sell that. So um that's where I think we are. And of course, Trump is in the is a long history of these networks as well. So it's hard for me to get to listen to commentators that suggest that Trump is a unique you know fighting force against the forces that he seems to have worked with his whole career. But you know like I said, I feel like you can have diplomatic solutions, hopefully, where if you need to have um, lithium or uranium or whatnot. But at the same time, it's like we had the Cold War, we had the Nunn-Lugar Act, where we supposedly had all this material that we had, that Russia had, spent a huge part of their GDP for 70 years to, accumulate and develop. And then, like, that just disappeared. It's like the official story is it fell off a truck. The megatons to megawatts, like, didn't, we don't know where it is. There could be loose nukes now. So rather than um, creating a system where we can, control the material that we've already spent 70 years creating and having a Cold War for, um, get a hold of that material first before he's like, oh, well, now we got to start over and remine everything. And, we've got this, Elon Musk is buddies with this Mike Griffin from InQtel that was the head of Brilliant Pebbles, its Strategic Defense Initiative. And he wants to get him all these old Russian ICBMs to help him start SpaceX. So I don't know. It just seems like it's all InQtel. Like I don't know. I don't see a big um, difference between the characters. So I struggle with the a lot of the narratives. I don't feel like going to Mars and colonizing Mars, and we need all this like rocket material and, all these, resources to go to Mars with. To me, that's if you're making a list of priorities of things to spend your resources on, the Mars colony would not even make the page. So to suggest that we do policy based on material acquisition so that we can do projects like that, I don't know. I mean, I feel like that should be challenged. I feel like other ideas could be more effective.
Well, I was thinking about that in terms of the Prouty comments, which make a lot of sense to me. That at a certain point, the globe became finite, and people who launch ships to go explore things started realizing that there's only so many things to go out there and grab. But Mars presents a new horizon of stuff to go get. And investing, if the world becomes convinced, as Elon is doing such a great job of selling, that it's practical and we can do this, then why not? I mean, that's that's why we have a stock market that just and money that just keeps on multiplying. Because if now people don't have no longer have the limits, it's like psychologically, oh well, hell, we're going to mine all the asteroids. We already know this asteroid has lithium, this asteroid has lots of great cadmium, and this one has other stuff, and we're just going to grab it all, and America is going to run the show. And so we won. We're that's one way to look at this. And as far as the taking things by violence, this is, to me, this is just so obviously a mafia style of interaction. Where as I was telling my wife the other night, is she couldn't understand how if the Greenlanders own Greenland, and they don't want to sell it, then how can Trump get it? And I said, you have to watch The Godfather, because in The Godfather, the first thing you learn is everything has a price. Everything has a price. And, Denmark, they have a price. And we have a price. And because I think that's the world we live in. And Donald Trump knows that. Well, whether he does it for good or for ill, or because he has no choice, he is playing his hand like a godfather.
Well, the Godfather loves the horse head in the bed and the dead prostitute in the senator's bed blackmail. Those were very popular for the Michael Corleone. Um, so I don't know. I don't know if the Greenland, if the Denmark King of Denmark or whatever wakes up with a horse head, that could be suggestive that Paramount Pictures and you know um,
You don't even have
Korchak
to
and
do it anymore.
Kissinger have a hand on these machinations in the storylines that we're enduring.
Yeah, you don't have to even do the horse head thing anymore. You just show them the movie. Say,
Oh, you just do. Well, I mean, Elon he was an investor in OpenAI, and he has Grok, so he has potentially two different choices to make the horse head most lifelike. He could choose which one the blood looks the best.
You're talking about Elon.
Well, I'm talking about the horse head in the director's bed, which sadly I think is home built or burned because it was based off of the director with the horse head is based off of Louis B. Mayer or uh, the Columbia one, Harry Cohn, the one that raised Lenore, that married Louis Rosenstiel, that started Shenley and then married Walter Annenberg later. That was the ambassador and did all of the, had sunny lands out in Palm Springs with the Annenbergs, the best friends of the Reagans. Her uncle that raised her was Harry Cohn, and the Godfather Horsehead is based off of that. So that's another intrigue, because she was the, remember when we did the show with the Carnegie Foundation, with the three women in the front and then the group behind them,
Yeah,
and there were the three women, and Lenore is front center,
big
front row center.
old now I can't think of their names. I've seen pictures of them. Who else was in that picture?
So it was like Bill Gates,
Right.
Tom Brokaw, Soros, Bill
Soros
Gates'
was in there.
dad, David Rockefeller, Richard Parsons, the CBS head, um, the Brooke Astor was sitting next to Lenore Annenberg, the diamond that's the NYU hospital, Tisch Hospital donor. She's there. Fauci. I'm trying to think of all the people, but yeah, I mean that picture is. I mean, look, when I see those pictures, like one of the things I always think is like, well, is it just random? Is there a seating assignment? Is Lenore front row center? For a reason, or is that random? I don't think it's random.
That's one of our past shows, guys. You can find it on McDuff Archive on Rumble, and also on my BitChute. My BitChute is called McDuff Uncensored, and all of my shows are on McDuff Uncensored. Just go back at least 3.5 years now, so I'm sure that one is there too. Some of those shows are organized into playlists, and invite you to search around in my McDuff Uncensored channel on BitChute. That's a good place to find ones that you can't find on YouTube or even on Rumble. Yeah, that was a lot of interesting stuff, David. Always fun to talk to you and
Yeah,
learn.
I mean,
learn.
I feel like the Hollywood fires, though, it gets you thinking about all of the old directors and studios, and
Yeah,
you think of the Warner Brothers and the first motion picture unit, because Ronald Reagan was supposedly the one that recruited Marilyn Monroe at the first motion picture unit. That was, I think it was Harry Warner that ran first motion picture unit, but Reagan was in there, and they were that some of the history of the uh, the War Information Board, which was part of the OSS, like that. That's those relationships where you get, because like Donovan had James Warburg was his assistant, and James Warburg, who was the son of Max Warburg, the German banker whose brother was Paul at Kuhn and Loeb in New York. James was he was the head of the War Information Board in Europe, in the European theater during um, World War II, and um, so these characters are involved in psychological operations and information operations for the military. So you can see why Lenore and Walter Annenberg, being such good friends with Nancy and Ronald Reagan, is significant in history, because we were just talking about Strategic Defense Initiative, and Reagan was the president, and that was Ed Meese and Roy Cohn and Edward Teller that were all involved in that project. And then on the technical side, Mike Griffin, the guy that ran Brilliant Pebbles that became the head of In-Q-Tel, was the man that took a young Elon Musk to Russia to start the SpaceX company. So these connections, I feel like, are very important historically to understand how Hollywood, because there's a lot of talk about the sex crimes and violence and things like that of Hollywood, but there's a lot of information war that goes on, obviously, with those groups, and sort of seeing how a Reagan or a Jack Valenti character that's a swing person in the sort of the Hollywood and political scene is important to know.
Back to the fires. Somebody, more than one person, referred to the Getty estate as a place where maybe there's some bodies buried or some things that, and also as connected to a laser-based weapon program. I can't vouch for it. I just think that when the fire is going right there towards the Getty estate, maybe somebody is trying to get rid of some evidence, or otherwise, maybe it's an attack by one side against another. Uh, the Paradise Fire and other fires that have those weird uh, uh, trademarks where they don't burn the wood, but they melt the tires, and they melt the cars. In other words, a sign of not a combustible flame type fire, but something from an intense heat that somehow uh, left the trees standing. That's not what we have here. What we have here is a real horrible um, wind driven fire that is not have the signature that I would suspect came from some laser weapon, as I've speculated in the past about the past fires. All those satellites up there, and we don't know what they're capable of doing. But the more I look into it, the more I think, that is the high ground. If you got the satellites, then you can control everything that goes on below. Our Space Force, who knows what they're doing, but it's all got to be connected somehow. Maybe that was a little bit of speculation, but can you
No,
tell
I
us
mean,
anything about the Getty
I think
estate
about,
and what
yeah.
might be there?
Yeah, I think about all that stuff because the Getty family has the rich history with the Newsom family. They're longtime family friends.
Mm.
So with Gavin, if you remember when the Getty, was it John Paul Getty the third that got his ear chopped off in Italy, and they sent the ear, and that was William Newsom was the person that made that negotiation for um, the family to get him released or whatever, and he was the lawyer for the Gettys, and he was also with Otto von Bolschwing and the Reagan secretary Helen von Dahm. They were all together in that kind of paperclip extension. If people remember, Otto von Bolschwing was somebody that had worked with Reinhard Gehlen and then became a American business executive that was initially seemingly in pharmaceuticals quite a bit in the Midwest, and then moved to San Francisco Bay Area, where he got into technology with Reagan's long-term secretary, who later became the Austrian ambassador, Helen von Dahm, and then the other person was um, William Newsom, who was representing Getty interests. So, but the other thing too, that so when you hear like the kind of the QAnon crowd and the tunnels, and is it the tunnels and all this stuff, that's a part of the discourse. So I always, like, whenever I hear something like that, I always try to think, well, that could be true, it could not be true. I don't have any evidence of it, but is it uh, a piece of information used strategically to get you to think or not think about something else that's similar, maybe? So what I think of is the shipbuilding in Oakland, California by Kaiser Shipbuilding. They made a key system of logistics with their trains and trolleys where they did the shipbuilding, where they were able to make a huge amount of naval ships for World War II. And that was the Kaiser Company. And the head of the shipbuilding board that was working with them was Joe Kennedy, the father of JFK, was
Oh,
working with Henry Kaiser. Now, this is personal for me because I do a call on Mondays, and I got chewed out by a relative of the Kennedys and Kaisers, and they said that I was just, gossiping about the Kennedy family. But I wasn't, because the thing is that Edgar Kaiser, that ran that operation for Henry, moved to Ann Arbor, Michigan, to Barton Hills, to 100 Underdown Road, where he ran Kaiser Frazier. Kaiser Frazier was Willow Run. Willow Run was where they had Rose of the River and the B-24s, and that was Charles Lindbergh and the Fords that ran that. And after the war, they had um, a missile operation on that site. It was called the Michigan Aeronautical Research Center, and they partnered with a aerospace company called Boeing from Washington, and they created a missile called the Bomark missile, which was the first intercontinental ballistic missile. And the person that ran that program was a guy named Dow, and he had worked for General Motors and for Fisher Body, and he had a patent for a welding technique, induction welding technique that was used in the Fisher bodies. It was then applied to making skins for airplanes and missiles and rockets and things like that. So he got a job with Fred Terman, who Silicon Valley people know. Fred Terman is one of the two fathers of Silicon Valley. He was the head of the Harvard Radio Lab during the Manhattan Project, and he had a guy named William Dow, working for him from Michigan, from Willow Run. So then he goes back to Willow Run after the war and is working on these Bomark missiles. So you have Magnus von Braun living in Birmingham. Charles Lindbergh's living at Cranbrook, right? His kids are going to Brookside. His wife is at the school. He's, giving help out at Willow Run with Henry Ford for B-24 and the Rosie the Riveter, right? We can do it. Everybody knows the icon. That was taken over by Henry Kaiser, and that same Henry Kaiser was involved in Kaiser Permanente. So for all of your, hippies, and Timothy O'Leary was, worked for Kaiser. He was the head of the Kaiser Foundation before he went to Harvard. He was with Kaiser. So that, LSD, the Ken Kesey, I've talked a lot about Larry Brilliant, all that. That's all connected to that. And Brilliant is from Michigan. He's from Detroit, and he went to Michigan and Wayne State, which is in, right basically next to the General Motors headquarters and the Fisher building. So all this stuff is like, to me, like, well, that's what I think it is. Like I know Elon has his Boring Company, and he's supposed to have the tunneling, and part of the Nazi folklore is that they had this, incredible engineering abilities to do underground facilities and build outs, and they could create all these defensive structures, and they were world leading in that. And it's like, well, then it becomes secret. It's like, well, it's part of Paperclip, and we don't know, and we have Area 51, and we could have all this stuff, but it's too hot for the average person to handle, so we'll just tease it for a lifetime for most people. And that's what I don't know. I mean, I don't know what's real and what's fake as far as that aliens and all that stuff, but I do look at, well, the people that created Area 51 was Alan Dulles and Richard Bissell and Charles Cabal, who set up the strategic, the Civil Air Transport. He worked with George Duell, that, all the Air America, the Southern Air Transport, that was part of an idea, a very smart idea, that we have airplanes now. We have cargo airplanes. So now we're able to move material in a way we couldn't before. So we're going to set up a network of stations so that we can take advantage of this, which is a great idea. To be able to move material around and have it ready is great. But, if you're going to do a Golden Triangle takeover with it and, have a couple, run the drug trade through it too, I mean, there's possibilities for abuse. So when you have the same people that are creating the Lockheed U-2, and again, the Lockheed story goes to Detroit Aircraft Company in the 30s. I know that's, like, for me, that's so, like, just drilled into my head because it involved such important people: Henry Ford, Edsel Ford, Charles Kettering, William Bushnell Stout, and then Alex Dow were Detroit Aircraft Company. When that went bankrupt, it moved to Santa Monica and becomes, Lockheed develops in California. It'd been in California before, but it went to Detroit, and then it goes back to California after during the New Deal. But then Lockheed gets into all these intrigues, like the U-2 spy plane. Charles Cabal and Bissell are going to meet with Konrad Adenauer to set up secret bases to fly over Russia during the Cold War. It's the same people that are doing that. So, and also Cabal, besides being fired, you're doing, an incredible shows on your dad and sort of the playing field of the world when he was, going into the Saxa. Well, the Charles Cabal, the guy that had set up the lift, worked with Fletcher Prouty intimately. They would have worked together. And the other person that was really important in that was the guy from American Airlines, Smith. I forget his first name, but that was the person that Prouty worked with originally, and he was a huge person in the history of aviation. I forget his first name, but he was like the chairman of American Airline. But you have those. You've got the so you've got the same people that are doing that, and then the Lockheed becomes the the Gary Powers incident. It becomes the the pretext for the Bay of Pigs. It also becomes the Adnan Khashoggi story. He becomes the Lockheed salesman of the stars and makes 180 million in commissions from Lockheed over 6 years.
And
Prince Bernhard.
don't forget to mention Prince Bernhard.
Well, you can't forget Prince Bernhard because he had to give up all of his. He was on the board of directors of like 400 companies. He had to give all that up. He couldn't wear his Nazi uniform anymore. They took away his ability to wear his Nazi uniform.
And it all ties it right back to the Tula Society, doesn't it?
Well, he was an accountant for IG Farben in Paris. So the Paris location is obviously not the same as the Frankfurt headquarters that became the NATO headquarters, the IG Farben building, which they don't list the architect, but they do say that the IG Farben building in Frankfurt is very similar in design and style to the Cadillac building in Detroit, which was, of course, Albert Kahn that designed that. But Albert Kahn's brother, Julius Kahn, he had the Truss Steel Company, and he partnered with Ivar Kruger. And if people remember the Kruger crash, remember during the
Match King.
What's that?
The Match King.
The Match King. And the Match King died. Remember, he was like potentially murdered in Paris, and all of his, he caused the entire depression of Europe. And then the Wallenbergs just scoop up all the assets on the cheap. Just great buy, buy low, sell high. It's one of the foundations of being a smart investor like Warren Buffett, is to know when blood in the streets is when you start, get your checkbook. You don't run away. You start buying when there's, murder. So this.
That's why I think we should buy some lots up in Greenland.
Well, would you send Raul to the University of Michigan to study architecture with the Kahns, like Raoul Wallenberg, the great OSS agent that went to Hungary and I think saved 80,000 Jewish people? He's like a huge icon, Raoul Wallenberg, as a in Hungary. Is that right? Yeah, in Hungary, I believe he was. He saved like a lot of people. So he was a Michigan Wolverine. So I don't know. It's really weird that you have the one OSS, savior character, martyr character, and then you have the other part of the family that is not only intermarried with the head of the SOE. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna blank on his name. They're another huge banking family in England. What's that?
Hambro?
No, Hambro. Charlie Hambro was the so Charles Hambro's dad married, I think, Alfred Wallenberg's ex-wife or something. There was like an ex-wife that married. It's like the Onassis and Starvos thing. But then they got into NatWest together, which is a huge, European bank. And then Charles Hambro was then the SOE head, who would have been, the counterparty to Donovan. And Donovan, being the OSS head. And then you'd have people like William Stevenson, a sort of a swing guy that was really a Canadian, but, had spent time in England and then was sent to New York. And then you'd have, of course, Rockefeller Foundation is in the same, they're all in the, 30 Rock. So that's where, that's why if you notice, I show pictures of Rockefeller Center a lot. It's because I think it's really, really important. Really important.
David, you mentioned you do a call on Mondays. I have not caught up with it. Can you give me the lowdown on how to find your calls on Mondays?
Well, the neighborhood news people, specifically John Wilcox, or John Wilcox, my old worker. I do a call Monday, and it's a Zoom meeting. It's not like, I think they record it and people listen to it, but it's
Oh, it's not live then?
No, I just talk. I mean, it's just like a dump of like where I just well, I sometimes will talk for hours. So I mean, I know a lot. A little goes a long way, and
What's the address we go to listen to these talks?
gosh, I don't even know. I'll have to ask John if that's if they're published or whatever. I don't even really know. I
Oh,
mean, I just
okay.
I try to
I
I
understand.
feel like it's good for me to talk because I don't, I don't talk to a lot, I don't present a lot. So it helps me
Yeah.
organize, hopefully become a better presenter over time. But yeah.
Well, I think you're doing fantastic and learned an awful lot from you today. I see it's just about 4 minutes of. Somebody asked me if you would take a minute to explain uh, about your grandmother's comments about the death of your grandfather and the involvement or possible involvement of Henry Ford. Could you go
I'm
through that?
Yeah, that's fine. I'm glad people are reading my Twitter because I drop things like that in there, and
Hmm.
I wonder if people ever notice that stuff because that is I mean a huge part of the story. And the call I had last Monday was probably my worst one. It was contentious because there was somebody that came in that wanted to do a, thing, and I just wasn't interested in it. But um the reason that it is so personal to me is because so the person that we're talking about is Helen Douglas Underdown, and there's very little information about her. I didn't know really anything about her growing up 'cause she was long gone, but she was from Trumansburg, New York, like my great grandfather, who was William Underdown. He was a Cornell agricultural school person. He was recruited by Alex Dow, who was the same man that introduced Henry Ford to Thomas Edison. He was the head of the Detroit Edison Company. Henry Ford worked for Edison to start his career. He was a substation manager, and then there was a guy named Alexander Malcolmson who was a coal dealer that knew Ford from Edison. That was the initial investor in the original Ford Motor Company. Was the German Bank of Detroit, and this Alexander Malcolmson, who was a Scot, were the original investors. And then they went bankrupt and they couldn't pay their bills to the Dodge brothers. So then when they reincorporated Ford Motor, Dodge got a 10% stake in equity as a payment. But my great grandfather, or so this William Underdown, who had been a Cornell agricultural school person, was recruited by Alex Dow to be the farm manager for Detroit Edison. From what I understand, that was buying real estate along rivers, and hydroelectric power was a new thing. And so that was what what he was doing was buying property, and then Detroit Edison would then build stations, and then the electrical grids and whatnot. So he was involved in that. So it's a little confusing because he has an agricultural background and was known as an arborist. He planted all the trees in Barton Hills personally. He had the Olmsted Company work with him to do that project. And so he and his wife moved to Barton Hills, where he subdivides Barton Hills, which is the neighborhood next to Ann Arbor. Alex Dow and Vivian are their best friends and neighbors. They're the first two houses in Barton Hills. So, and I don't know a lot of the details of what happened, but in 1930, my great grandfather, the story was he was drunk and he ran his car off the road and he died in a ditch, and he was gone. And then Helen couldn't afford to live in the house on Underdown Road, so then she moved with her four boys, including my grandpa Underdown. They went to the smaller house in Barton Hills. My grandfather, David Jewett Underdown, um, threw a peanut in the air right after his dad died, ingested a peanut, collapsed his lung, and then goes to the Trudeau Sanitarium in Lake Saranac, right next to the Knollwood Club, where Lewis Marshall, who was the lawyer that sued Henry Ford, had his summer home. So the rumor is that Helen said that she blamed Ford for his death, that he was killed by Henry Ford's people. Now, the person who would be the most likely suspect is going to be Harry Bennett, who runs security for Ford, that lives in Ann Arbor, right? Would have been their neighbor, and then had the lions and tigers and bears, and kind of had the Pablo Escobar thing going where he had all the, guns and wild animals and all that stuff. He lived there also. And then, my grandpa, went to University of Michigan. His brothers went to Michigan. His brother Douglas did die right before he started the dry cleaner. But later, that my great grandmother, she died by burning. She was in Connecticut, and it was a fire, and they said it was a kitchen fire, and she caught her robe on fire. She died by burning. And so, and that was all I knew about her, because that happened in the 40s, maybe, that she burned. And she was long gone before I was born. I'd heard that she was not that smart and not that outstanding or whatever. But this is her right here. So that's my grandpa. That's William Underdown, and that's Helen. And you can see they're very stylish couple. I mean, they certainly look the part of somebody that would be, socializing with Alex Dow and Henry Ford and whatnot. But that was them. And so she died of burning, and there was a big thing because, like, she wasn't buried and didn't have a tombstone. And then my Uncle Bill paid for her to get a tombstone in Trumansburg. And so it's just like there was no. So, like, as a kid, like, I didn't ever think, oh, well, she's, what's the Douglas name? Like, does Douglas mean anything? Why is there no info? Like, so that's part of it for me, like, trying to understand the history of that name and the mystery around it. And I've talked about before with the the brother, William's brother. He got hired by the Undersecretary of War that was married to the Phelps Dodge heiress that was, the playmate of Teddy Roosevelt. And the person that took over Phelps Dodge was William Douglas. And William Douglas is the one that gave the radium to Memorial Sloan Kettering in, like, 1903. William Douglas gave that. That was Ewing, the guy from Cornell Medical, was the first, I think, the head of the National Cancer Society, but he was the same doctor that had worked with John D. Rockefeller in Cleveland. And then there's also the connection with the Cooley toxins, which was the first cancer vaccine. That was Park Davis in Detroit. And then the Harvey Merker, that was the chief chemist, is the one that introduced my mom and dad, and he was really good friends with my grandma. So I don't know. I mean, but that's the background. So it's like, so with that, and of course my dad has no concept of any of these things, because he just knew, he lost his mom like you did. He was a freshman when he was in college, and she died. And so he was really traumatized from that. And he had a rough relationship with my grandpa. So it was just a lot of, so it's just sad, because you think about all these things with, like, Hitler and Hitler's mom had cancer. And then it's like, William Knudsen is the guy that met Hitler in 33, right? Knudsen's grandson was my dad's, classmate at Gal School. He was in my parents' wedding. He stood up at my parents' wedding. So, and then, like I've talked about before with my grandma, who was not from that family, she was from the Cranmers in Steubenville. She married the son of that, my grandpa. She's got the similar Michigan medical history, going back 4 generations of medical doctors from Michigan. So there's just, like, a lot of, so when I highlight all these, like, Michigan intrigues with the University of Michigan, that's why. Is because I feel like, people like my grandma, there's no information about her historically, but it certainly seems like my grandpa was recruited by Alex Dow, who was on Detroit Aircraft Company with Edsel Ford and Henry Ford. William Bushnell Stout, that was the chief engineer for Convair during, the whole, merger with LCV and Henry Crown and General Dynamics later. He started his career at Scripps Booth Automotive. That's the same Scripps, Booth, Cranbrook, the other roommate of my dad at the Gow School was Peter Booth. So it was Peter Knutson and Peter Booth were his two friends that went to this boarding school. The one's grandfather started the Cranbrook School and was the Detroit News and all the scripts, oceanography and all that stuff. That was his grandma's family. And then, so he was the head engineer for their car company first before Henry Ford hired him to develop the tri-motor. He developed the Ford Airport in Dearborn, the first, routes that were developed from Dearborn to Grand Rapids and Chicago. That was stout. He did the tri-motor. So when you have, for people that are into this Arctic stuff right now, if you go to Antarctica and you've got the, Admiral Byrd flying down there, he's flying on the Josephine Ford, which is a tri-motor. That was Edsel Ford that sponsored that. So again, you have all these connections. You've got Ford work going on. You've got the, Albert Kahn doing the 500 factories plus in Russia for their Stalin 5-year plan.
Yeah,
it's like a lot going on.
David, we got to wrap it up. But what have you found in terms of a motive as to why did was it your grandmother, your great grandmother, think that Henry Ford or his henchmen were the cause of your great grandfather's death? What would be his motive?
Well, again, like I did not grow up thinking that he had some really important, like wealthy, position. But as we all know, there are people that flee to certain situations and go into hiding, right? And so, is that the case? I don't know. But what's the motive? To me, the opium trade is a big one because in 1888 they sent the president of University of Michigan, James Angel, to China to do an opium and a coolie slave deal for Pierce. Franklin Pierce assigned him to do that, so he left the University of Michigan to do the opium deal. And you also had the history of Michigan Medical School with the dispute over holistic medicine versus more modern medicine, with the Silas Douglas being the founder of Michigan Medical School.
So
Douglas.
So you feel that your great grandfather may have been a potential whistleblower of some kind?
I don't know, because so it's 1930. So in 1930, in that era, you have Ford Motor going into Germany. The Ford Motor had just done the deal with Russia. The Stalin 5-year plan was in 27. General Motors had just bought Opel. Opel Rack had, like, Dornberger was working for them. Like a lot of the Mars Society, all of that from Germany comes out of this Opel Rack, Fritz Opel tradition of the rocket planes and all that stuff. So what his connection? I don't know. I think that the other thing is the seizure of the pharmaceutical companies in 1918 is another intrigue, because Merck, which again, Harvey Merker was the family friend that was at Park Davis, but is that a stylized version of Merck? And was he just an old German Merck that got a Merker name? Park Davis, for people don't know, was the largest pharmaceutical company in the world. I think 1880, like 1930 was the biggest. So it was significant. But she was from Steubenville, Ohio, and remember, her dad was the doctor there that in Steubenville. And the Merck not Merck, but Merck was bought by Goldman Sachs and Lehman Brothers and George Merck that did the bioweapons program for the World War II. But it was not Pfizer, Merck, Pfizer, and I'm blanking on all my.
But what did your great grandfather have to do with all that?
He was doing X-rays. He was very early in X-rays, and he was somebody where his hands fell off, like the skin on his hands fell off because he was doing early X-rays. So he was in Steubenville. So is that tied to the radium girl story? I mean, the guy that won the Nobel Prize for radiating fruit flies, Hermann Joseph Muller, was the next door neighbor of my mom, and he was the mentor of James Watson, James Watson of Watson and Crick. So it's like you have all these
Well,
like,
maybe since he's a X-ray guy, that he was participating in the radiological alteration of fruit flies for Herman Muller.
he could have been, because the thing is, the person that was the leader in the fruit flies was Thomas Hunt Morgan, and he was from, Lexington, Kentucky, and he went to Columbia and had the fly lab, and that was where Muller was working, and that's where Muller, when he got recruited by Julian Huxley to start Rice University's biology program, that was where that happened. But Morgan in Lexington is very close to Steubenville, and it is on the Ohio River. It's just down the river, so there would be a logistic potential for somebody down the river to have a relationship like that. So I don't know. I mean,
It's something you're going to be pursuing probably for the rest of your life, just like I pursue what happened to my dad, and all of the other amazing circumstances that you have surrounding your life. It's just a great benefit to us that you share this with us, and your amazing ability to connect all these things. I can't. I've said it many times, but I can't wait to read your book.
yeah.
So, but maybe you just strip all of your Twitter posts, your X posts, and patch them all together. That would.
I mean, I'm
That would be
hoping that
good
some tech person can just feed it into like a chat GPT and like use it as a chat GPT tool and supplement it with other things, and hopefully it would be helpful. But
But that's what I think that really is going on here, is when you say these
yeah,
chat GPT things, the Grok and all, are not so good at putting together facts that the rest of us can put together. But as you and I share on these shows, and you do your other presentations in the calls, and other people all over the place are putting all this information out onto social media, that the Groks and the open chat AIs are just grabbing it all up and putting it together, so that they will one day be able to give you a rational answer of how do you connect X to Y, or one person to another. David, thank you so much. We're going to have to wrap it up here. And folks, make sure and sign up for McDuff Lives on Rumble, so you get notices of all of our shows. And thanks for watching us. If you're on YouTube, just be aware that a lot of times the shows disappear if we mentioned one of the YouTube no-nos, but I think this show will survive. David, thanks again. We'll talk to you again soon. Happy New Year.
thank you. Happy New Year.